Hello, friends. Welcome to the Azure Developer Series. We are going to learn how to do auto scaling today. I just realized that the PowerPoint slides are slowing me down, so I'm going to try something new. I'm going to use a Microsoft Word document and I'll probably type the pointers or the key points while I'm talking about this particular lecture. If you still prefer slides, share it in the comments, or if this is fine, we can probably go faster and complete the developer series faster. All right, so let's try this out today. So, today we are going to learn the topic of auto scaling. We are going to see basically what is auto scaling, how is it done, or why is it done. We'll see when it not should be done and when it should not be done, and we'll see how is it done specifically for Azure, and also we'll see some of the best practices around it. Okay, so what is autoscaling? So as I mentioned to you, what does scaling do? If you really want your application to be available all the time, then you have to ensure that you are on the best possible resources, best possible number of servers underlying, right? But the challenge with that will be your cost will be very high. So, in order to ensure that you are meeting the varying demand from the users, your different workload which is happening on your application, but still, if you want to keep your costs at bay, then you will have to do auto scaling. Okay, so basically, when we talk about scaling, there are two types of scaling in and out, also scaling up and down, right? So, scaling in and out is nothing but basically the horizontal scaling, which means that you actually add or remove underlying resources. Maybe you will add instances, reduce instances, things like that. And up and down scaling is a vertical scaling, right? Now, in vertical scaling, you do not really add or remove instances, but you will actually increase or decrease the underlying infrastructure. Maybe you will, sorry, maybe you will add a more CPU cores or remove, right? So whenever we are talking about auto scaling, it is always scaling in and out. We do not really do an up and down scaling. If you have to basically scale the resources, the power of the resources underlying, you always have to use the app service plan and change the pricing tier. Let us say if you are on a standard, you may want to go to premium. And if you're on a premium version 1, V1, you may want to go to a V2 for better hardware, right? So whenever it's auto scaling, please remember it is always scaling in and out. It does not deal with uh, upgrading or downgrading the existing resources. Okay. Okay. So, what is auto scaling in Azure scenario, right? So, basically, in Azure scenario, it means that the Azure App Service is kind of monitoring the resource metrics that your web application is running on. So, for example, if you consider an IRCTC website, let us say hypothetically it is running on an Azure App Service. So, during the Tatkal period, the number of people who are active on the website is very, very high. So, the resources which are being, the resource metrics of that particular website, like number of HTTP requests which are coming in, or the CPU cycles that the underlying resources are using, is very high, right? So, Azure App Service kind of monitors this kind of behavior of the application through something called as metrics, and depending on the metrics it will detect, or it will kind of understand that this situation is when you need additional resources to be able to handle this increased workload, so that your website is available and not going to timeouts or application not responding kind of behavior, right? So this is a very typical scenario where during the peak you want the application to be totally scaled up, and during non-peak hours you want it to scale down so that your costs are at bay, right? But kindly remember again that auto scaling does not have any effect on basically CPU or memory or storage of the underlying instances. If you really want a better CPU and memory, we need to consider increasing or changing the uh, pricing tier of the ASP. Auto scaling will not help here. Okay, so I hope that point is clear. Okay, so how does basically Azure determine, right? Or how is this happening? So as I mentioned to you, metrics of the resource usage is the important way of detecting a situation. And let us say you have rules defined saying that if the metrics are above or below a threshold, then you need to scale in or scale out, right? So those kind of rules you can actually define depending on the metrics which are being captured for the resources. So we'll get into details as to how this metrics is captured, and how much time does it really require for the metrics to be realistic, right? If you're capturing a metrics within a minute may not be a realistic. So you need a particular duration for which you need to capture the metrics and then take the action. So let's get there, as we proceed. But this is how generally the auto scaling works. Okay, now let's consider a scenario. Consider when you should basically think of auto scaling, right? When. So we did the why, we did the how. We let's do the when now. So consider the same example, right? IRCTC example. When you want elasticity of the website. Let us say that during the peak hours of Tatkal, maybe you want more resources to be there, but in order to keep the cost down, you want it to be scaled down during the non peak hours, right? You want your application to be highly available and fault tolerant, right? So consider, you're doing a mission critical application, okay, that you really cannot, especially in this cutting edge competitive world. If at all a customer is coming, let us say, to an Amazon website, it's not necessarily mission critical, but business critical would be the right word. So let's say he's coming to the Amazon website, and if for whatever reason the website is really not responding, the user may go to another competitive and he may really not come back. So it's very important for scenarios where it's business critical and you do not want users to get a you do not want the users to get a timeout or not a responsive behavior, right? So let's say when not to use it. So let's say you're doing like a data science or kind of a project or highly resource intensive operations, right? Like some algorithm or some processing which requires huge CPU or memory intensive requirements, right? In those scenarios, what's going to happen is even if you auto scale, it's not going to help you. You actually need to kind of scale up your application to use better CPU and better memory better storage scenarios like this. But auto scaling is not going to help us here. So even if you do auto scaling, it's really going to waste your money, but the application behavior will not really be up to the mark, right? uh, in cases of long term growth also, basically auto scaling may really not be of much help. Let's say you started a small organization like a startup where you have 100 employees, and now you have grown to 10,000 employees. So every day if you kind of depend only on the auto scaling, because auto scaling also comes with some sort of a overhead, right? If you only uh, uh, basically kind of rely on auto scaling and not keeping the number of instances or the default instance count to the bare minimal, then by the time the scaling is happening, some of the users must have got a not so nice experience like a timeout or something. So it's important that you have the minimum instance count or the number of instances correctly, and depending on the number of resources or the number of hits that you're getting, you actually ensure that the default scaling is done. Only relying on auto scaling for such scenarios may not be helpful. All right. So basically, what we have covered is we've covered what is auto scaling, how is it done, when it is done, and why it is done, right? We've covered these. For these two topics, because these are going to be 10 minutes more, I would like to have a different video because this may get longer. So look at that video and let me know in the comment section if this manner of doing it, like the typing, is okay or not. Again, thank you so much. Hope this is of some help. Bye.